Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone.
Less than 2 months away from Election Day.
That's right. What's
the feel in Washington D.C.? Is there like a midterm fever? Does there spring everybody's step when it's campaign time, or is everyone just focused on baseball now?
Well, both. Look, I think there is an energy. It's a company town, and that company, Bill, is politics. I think there is a little bit of an energy and excitement, especially as you get down to the wire. But you're right, baseball is also happening. I will be trekking out to Camden Yards on Friday night to watch my AL East division champion Baltimore Orioles play a meaningless game against the floundering Boston Red Sox. But here in Washington, of course, the Nationals have also clinched the NL East, and I'm rooting for a Beltway World Series. That would be amazing, and it could happen.
I guess that's never happened, right? There's never been, there hasn't always been a Washington and Baltimore team playing at the same time, let alone in the World Series at the same time.
No, you had the Senators, and then I think they were gone by the time the Orioles came around in 1954, and the Nats have only been here about a decade. And during that time, the Orioles surely haven't been to the World Series. They do play each other in interleague play. I went down to the Nationals Stadium in August, in fact, and watched the Orioles defeat the Nats. And it's a very, it's sort of you'll see all these mixed relationships. All of these, it's typically a girl wearing a Nats jersey and a boyfriend wearing an Orioles jersey for some reason. I've noticed, but a lot of people together, living in harmony. Cats sleeping with dogs. And I feel like so far I've been able to thread that needle and sort of root, for both teams. But eventually, I think it's going to have to get bitter and ugly, and maybe we're going to have to throw out Bryce Harper. I don't know, but they're having a healthy, vicious rivalry could be in the cards.
When I was a kid growing up in New York, it was always my dream to have a Subway series, and it happened when I was an adult, but I wasn't living in New York anymore. I was in San Francisco, and I was so excited, and then I would see news footage of what was going on in New York at the time, and I realized, wow, this just made New York seem like the worst place in the world. All the worst elements of New Yorkers are now displayed on my TV. That's why people hate New York. Oh, I get it now. So,
well, speaking of San Francisco, they had the Bay series or whatever, right? With the
that was before my time there. I was still in high school then, and it was
when Oakland and the Giants played.
Right, and because it was a Quake series, nobody cared outside of the Bay Area that it was happening.
That's right. And I think a similar phenomenon would happen if Baltimore played the Nationals. It's not exactly the Red Sox Dodgers or something like that.
Well, maybe not today. Maybe this is the beginning of something.
It could be. These are young teams, and these are teams that have deep benches. Somebody goes down, whether it's an Adderall suspension in the case of Chris Davis, or injuries in the case of Machado or Whiters, whatever. And they just keep the next guy up, just delivers. And the Nats have had the same phenomenon, injuries, guys go down, the next guy comes up and is amazing, maybe even arguably better than the last guy. We've also got a quarterback controversy here in D.C., of course, with Kirk Cousins and RG3. So it's an interesting time. It's my favorite time of the year for sports. When you head into the baseball playoffs, coinciding with the NFL really taking off. Hopefully it won't be too overshadowed by the horrible NFL stories that have been on the front page.
But fall, Matt, is also Aussie rules football playoff time. Let's not forget.
Yeah.
And my North Melbourne Kangaroos are in the semifinals, which in Australia called the preliminary finals. They were the sixth seeded team. The top 8 go into the playoffs. They were in the bottom 4, which means you don't get. If you're in the top 4, you can lose one. The way their system works, you're in a double elimination bracket. But if you're in the bottom 4, you can't lose anything. And they're the only, and so they're the number 6 team in the top 4 now. and they're the only team of the 4 who have beaten all the other teams. Because they had a weird season where like they were beating the best teams and losing to the middling teams. So they have a real shot to make it to the grand final on September 27th. They play the semifinal Friday night. Well, Friday night for them, Friday morning for us. So it's exciting sports time up here in the Scher household.
I will be up late that night watching ESPN 14. Well,
the game is at 5:45 in the morning for us tomorrow. So
well, you got to stay up though to tailgate. I mean, you can't just get up at 5 and expect to have the energy going. I feel like you need to pull it all nighter.
I can at least wake up around 6 and go on the AFL Twitter feed and track the action. That's the best I can do because these games don't get put up on YouTube till later.
Yeah, it's a real scourge, but I do understand why Ann Coulter hates Australian rules football and has been so anti-Australian rules football.
Well, we have our own political contest going on here in America, yes. And I wrote about one over at the Week early this week.
Maybe the most interesting one, actually, Bill. This may be the most interesting one because it would be possible for Republicans to like run the table and do everything everyone said they needed to do and fall short of taking the Senate by giving away what should have been a gimme.
Well, this is very confusing because, okay, so as you may know, the Democrat has abandoned his campaign.
This is Kansas, folks. This is Kansas.
That?
This is in Kansas.
In Kansas. The Democrat there abandoned his campaign, trying to get off the ballot completely. The Secretary of State there is trying to thwart him from doing that, but that's going to court now. They should decide whether he's on the ballot or not. But even in polls that include him now, because most people know he's not really running, and he's thrown his support to an independent named Greg Orman. Greg Orman is leading in polls that include the Democrat on the ballot. He's leading by 7 with the Democrat on the ballot, and he's leading by 10 in a head-to-head. And I think there's even a Libertarian in the race, too, to make things even more complicated for the incumbent Senator, Republican Pat Roberts. So most people are looking at the independent as being a de facto Democrat for some reason. He briefly ran for Senate as a Democrat in 2008, as Pat Roberts will eagerly tell you he has given money to Barack Obama and Harry Reid in the past, though he points out he's given money to Republicans, namely, I know he's given money to Scott Brown, for example. And he is saying, Greg Orman is saying, that he is growing increasingly disillusioned with both parties. He's fiscally conservative. He's socially tolerant. He wants immigration reform, but he wants to cut spending. That sort of thing. And so while Republicans are saying we have to beat Greg Orman because otherwise, we won't be able to take the Senate, Greg Orman is saying, and this is why people don't know that well, he's not saying he's going to caucus with the Democrats. When he's asked, he's not even saying he's going to caucus with the majority. I mean, actually, I take that back. He said if there is a clear majority, he will likely caucus with them. But he's also saying there's a good chance that on Election Day, there won't be a clear majority, that neither party will have secured the 51 votes they need to run the Senate outright. Because you not only have him, but you also have Angus King in Maine, who is an independent, who right now is caucusing with Democrats, but has said he could switch pending the results of the midterms. And Orman has even said he might reach out to a right-leaning Democrat like Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, or a relatively moderate Republican like Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, and say, okay, let's band together and tell the two parties we will caucus with whichever party puts forth I'm quoting Orman, a real, true problem-solving agenda. Yeah, which he does not define. And he's probably open to some criticism about that. He doesn't say exactly what he's looking for there. He's looking just to solve problems. But if he controls the balance of power in the Senate, he doesn't have to announce his intentions. He can play his cards the way he wants to and decide what constitutes problem solving as he sees fit. Now, you may look at that and say, well, that's fine, happy talk for a campaign. That's a cute way to evade the question who you're going to caucus with, because obviously if you say you're going to caucus with one side or the other, you've thrown away your independent brand, and that's the basis of your candidacy. So a lot of these independents that get this far, get kind of stymied by that question, because if you pick a side, you throw away your brand. If you don't pick a side, you seem ignorant about how the Senate works. Obviously, you have to pick a side, or you can't caucus, you can't get put on committees, you can't have any influence. But now he's found a way to thread this needle, because the control of the Senate is on a knife's edge, and now the extra wrinkle they put into this. So it seems to me like not just evasive talk for the campaign. He's promising that once they do make their decision, once some party has put forth a satisfying problem-solving agenda to his liking, he's going to give them a few months. He'll say in 4 or 5 months, this is what he said, in 4 or 5 months, if we're seeing the same partisanship and finger-pointing and bickering, we'll leave and we'll switch parties and go to the other side and give them a shot. So on one hand, Republicans can take some solace, saying, okay, well, look, if Orman wins, we may still be able to woo him to our side and still take control of the majority.
Maybe he's sincere, or maybe that's BS. I mean, isn't it safe to assume? Well, you can't know, but I mean, look, in Kansas, which is a Republican-leaning state, certainly, maybe this is what you have to say to get elected and to give people permission to vote for you. It seems like awfully convenient.
Well, and look, if you look at what issue stances he has taken, he comes across as more Democrat than Republican. He accepts climate science. He wants immigration reform with some pathway to legalization or citizenship. He wants to close the gun show loophole. But he says he wants to cut spending, and he's indicated he would do some entitlement reforms. That's where he seems more conservative. But there are other Democrats like that. So I think he does fit more snugly in the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. But he said what he said. He is running on that basis now. So he has some obligation to follow through, or catch hell from the state later on. I think the bigger risk for Republicans is I think he could very easily join the Republicans. If nothing else, on the basis of we got to do something different. They're showing me some leg here. They've given me some indication they're going to try to do. They said they're going to do immigration reform before. They said they're going to do it now. I'm going to take their word and see how far I can push them on it. And with the benefit of having the Congress in one party control, maybe we can actually get something passed and put on the president's desk. I could see him saying that. But even if he's being disingenuous, he could be being disingenuous, that could be saying Republicans to fail. That he gives them 6 months and then decrees, I, the great independent, have proven these Republicans are up to no good and refuse to work with the president. I declare, I banish them. I banish you from the control of the Senate.
Apparently, I'm looking at Twitter as we talk, on the daily rundown, they're talking about this. The Democratic strategist won't answer whether the Dems back Orman. Sean Spicer, who's the RNC communications guy, bets, quote, everything he has that Roberts wins. And that's from Jessica Taylor from The Hill, tweeted that. Well, let me ask you this, Bill. Obviously there's an anti-incumbent mood around the country. But really, 2 questions. One, this is Kansas. They're not known for, I don't think, the Midwestern places tend to be even more sort of pro status quo, sticking with incumbents. What happened that Pat Roberts, of all people, can't just win with 80% of the vote? And should Republicans have backed Milton Wolff stronger? Would he have had a better shot?
No, because what's going on in Kansas, and this is less about Roberts than Sam Brownback, because when Brownback was a senator from Kansas, now he's the governor, and he has run the state in a very conservative way. He has severely cut taxes and cut education spending, and with the promise that if they cut all these taxes, that they get this big revenue surge, which has not materialized. And you now have a breakaway faction of moderate Republicans who have abandoned Brownback. Before this Orman move, you already had 100+ Republican, I believe, former lawmakers that had backed the Democratic nominee for governor. I want to say Paul Davis. I'm can't remember if it was Paul or Pete. So you already had this tectonic plate shift in the state, and Orman is riding that. He got endorsements of 70 former moderate Republican lawmakers right before the Democrat dropped out. So that's why the Democrats, okay, there's a real opening here for a guy like Orman to take advantage of this political shift that's going on. And so, Roberts is now, kind of stuck because he wasn't always seen as Mr. Conservative. The Milton Wolff was running at him in the primary from the hard right. But Roberts has decided that, the way he's going to survive this is by jacking up base turnout. So he's running a very devoutly conservative campaign, trying to smoke out Orman as being a closet liberal and a closet Democrat. But at the same time, if you watch and it's one of the better debates, by the way, if you watch it on C-SPAN, the Kansas State Fair debate they had on September 6th, so for a big crowd, big unruly crowd, so it wasn't these stiff, scripted encounters in the TV studio. There's no audience. This is like a real rock'em sock'em debate. Roberts is trying to pummel Orman for being in league with Barack Obama and Harry Reid. I mean, that's the main message that he's going with, because obviously Barack Obama is not popular in Kansas, but he throws in there, I brought this pork home from Kansas. I did this, I did that, I built this thing, I built that thing. So, there's a bit of a discordance in the message there. But by and large, Roberts is trying to save himself by being as hard right as possible. But that's why it's gotten dicey, because you have this moderate Republican breakaway faction that's giving Orman a lot of oxygen.
Yeah, and there has, even though Kansas has tended to lean Republican, Sebelius, of course, was governor of Kansas, and there's long been that split between that's sort of the mods, as I think they call them in Kansas. We would call them rhinos.
And Bob Dole never was a fire breather conservative either. He always was seen as more of an establishment moderate type, and so the Brownback movement is somewhat new for Kansas. And it's causing a lot of friction right now.
And what's funny?
So if you pick Wolff, I don't think Wolff solves that problem. Wolff you need to get some of those moderate Republicans back in the Roberts fold, and Milton Wolff would have just lost all his guys, permanently.
Maybe though, he would have brought out more passion and more conservatives to turn out. Who knows? I mean, you're probably right, but you could always argue. That.
So I think if he does win, this puts Republicans in a very tricky position, assuming they do actually woo him over. Because then if they don't show some seriousness and compromise, Orman is going to totally stab them in the back. In the middle of 2015, just as the presidential primary season is ramping up. And I would think that would just be immensely humiliating. Really devastating for Republicans trying to get ahead of steam going into the primary season and position them to 2016. I think that would just be a really tough blow.
It happened. Yeah, that sort of same thing happened. I think the dude just passed away recently who abandoned the Republicans in 2001, 2002, and flipped
Jim Jeffords.
Right, Jim Jeffords, and flipped the Senate. Now, we do see, Bill, Cory Gardner, according to at least one poll, and it's an outlier, but he is leading Mark Udall by 8 points, according to this one poll. And then we see Scott Brown leading in some polls over Gene.
I thought I saw a tie with Scott Brown. I didn't see the Scott Brown lead yet. Did something happen today?
No, well, okay, maybe you're right, but that's huge. The fact that it's tied. So Republicans are potentially expanding the map, and so maybe Kansas won't matter. But as I said earlier, this is huge because it's possible Republicans to do everything, but if they lose in Kansas, which is a state they were never worried about, that could be the deciding factor, which would prevent them from taking the Senate. That would be really fascinating if that were to happen.
Well, you see, the Quinnipiac put out polls, I believe, in Colorado and Iowa that were very strong for the Republicans there. But they do seem to have a very stiff, likely voters screen that is skewing Republican. And it doesn't mean that's wrong. It means that they're making their own subjective judgment what the turnout composition is going to be. And that's showing a much more heavier Republican lean than what some other polls that have shown more dead heat races. I think in Colorado more races, more trial heats where Udall is ahead. And then the Scott Brown poll, which is a CNN poll, was similar, where in the likely voter model it was a dead heat. In the registered voters, Shaheen was up by 7. So it really comes down to who's going to show up. Do Democrats have a get-out-the-vote operation akin to 2012 where they surpass expectations?
Okay, but enough of your unskewed polls.
Well, I'm not unskewing. I mean, that's just an unknown.
And your war on science, Bill. I've had enough. But then, okay, so let's juxtapose that Quinnipiac stuff with the PPP poll yesterday that Huffington Post, I think, had, was showing that Pat Roberts is losing. Again, fascinating potential story here. And Bill, let me just say,
and I believe the Democrat is up in Alaska by a little bit, and in North Carolina, and more recently have showed a Democrat down in Arkansas. So in theory, because they got to win 6, to take control, they presumably have Montana, South Dakota, and West Virginia in the bag. The question is, can they get 3 more? So let's say that the Quinnipiac polls in Colorado and Iowa are correct, and the Arkansas one is correct. That would give them the 6.
Right, even if they lose New Hampshire.
And then if they lose Kansas, they're back down to 5 unless Orman gives them a lifeline.
Yeah, this could be very interesting. You asked me at the top of the show, Bill, about the excitement. I think we're starting to see this thing get super exciting. This is, I mean, I'm a little jaded, right? But I mean, we're actually starting to get, this is like a pennant race, It's like, what's the magic number and all this, how many games, it's starting to get really interesting. We're getting close. And kudos to you, Bill, for I think being on top of this story that people still aren't it's an utterly fascinating story in Kansas, and I don't think it's getting the excitement that it deserves.
But I think it will get there. I think as people, I mean, we're a little early in the season. I think it will be more evident to people as we go forward. But I think also some of these other races, this is not really, I don't think, too nationalized as of yet. I mean, you certainly see certain themes in ads. You're seeing a lot of Republican ads talking about voting with Obama 97% of the time. That's definitely a staple. You see a lot of anti-incumbent messages on both sides of the ledger. So-and-so's gone Washington. Greg Orman's doing that against Pat Roberts. Bill Cassidy's doing that against Mary Landrieu in Louisiana. That's another one, by the way. Louisiana is also not looking so good for Landrieu right now, but that's a tricky one because it's a so-called jungle primary where there's no primaries beforehand. So you have Landrieu up against like 3 Republicans all on the same day in November. And if nobody gets 50, then they get a runoff in December. So you might have a situation where the outcome is not known until December. And so the real question there is, can Mary Landrieu find a way to run up the score with her base and crack 50 while the Republicans are divided and avoid that? Most people think that will not happen. They will go into a runoff at least. Then it's a question of how do you handle potentially a relatively low turnout race but might not be low turnout if it seemed like this is the entire control of the Senate being decided with this one race. So the Republicans there hitting Mary Landrieu. She lives in a big mansion in Washington, and she wants to give D.C. money so D.C. can have a budget. And Kang's doing this to Roberts. Grimes doing this to McConnell in Kentucky. So you have these anti-incumbency staples, but you have these other local quirks, like in Alaska. The Republican campaign is accusing Mark Begich of faking his snowmobile ride in one of his ads. And Begich is accusing the Attorney General, Dan Sullivan, of overhyping this settlement he made involving the state pension fund. So he got fleeced by Wall Street. He didn't beat Wall Street. So there's stuff like that in most of these local races where it may not be easily interpreted as a wave one way or the other. And as I mentioned last week, Republicans are leaning left in certain elements anyway. Sullivan's sounding pro-minimum wage in Alaska. Cotton's being a little pro-minimum wage in Arkansas. Cory Gardner and Joni Ernst are trying to sound softer on abortion issues. So that stuff's going on too.
You know way too much about this, Bill. We need to change the subject.
Well, you had an interesting piece that was an issue that's not on my radar at all. About Ken Cuccinelli, which no one's even thinking about because he lost his governor's race to Terry McAuliffe in Virginia. But he is rattling some cages in conservative circles.
Yeah. Well, I haven't written about this yet. I've tweeted it, but there is a story which I've confirmed. It's in something called Courthouse News Service, but it's legit. And he is suing. He's the former Virginia Attorney General. He ran for governor. He now heads a group called the Senate Conservatives Fund. And, full disclosure, my wife previously consulted for him, not on his gubernatorial race, but in the past. And he was recently on my podcast. Check it out. But he ran for governor, and he is suing a group called Conservative Strike Force PAC, and essentially alleging that they scammed Republican donors nationwide. Essentially alleging that they raised over $2 million and did not spend that money on his campaign. And so this is interesting. I mean, these are allegations. It's a lawsuit. But I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, Cuccinelli is not a rhino by any stretch. I mean, he is a hardcore, rock-ribbed conservative. And for him to be going after these groups on the right, which, this is not the first story alleging that outside groups and have raised money mostly to pay consultants and themselves, he has credibility, I think, in a way that others may not. And I also think it's kudos to him because, a lot of times candidates, this happens and then they just move on. They have no incentive to follow up legally. And so they just kick the can down the road and it continues. And so assuming Cuccinelli's allegations are correct, this will potentially create a disincentive for these groups to operate unethically. So I find it a fascinating story. It has not taken off, and who knows if it will. But for those who care about the conservative movement, who've been writing about how Tea Party groups and PACs and outside groups are allegedly bilking conservative donors via direct mail programs and email fundraising, this is a huge development.
I mean, this gets into the whole notion of you start as a movement, then you turn to a business, and ends up being a racket.
Yeah.
This. I mean, I am on a handful of conservative email lists, and a number of them feel very, very hacky to me. Feel like they're trying to fleece me and trying to get money out of my pocket, and because I don't see them do anything. I don't see them otherwise being active. I mean, is this? I don't really see the same on the left. I think there are certain groups that maybe are not effectual. I don't know if there are any groups who are just taking money and not doing anything with it, but paying themselves. I could be mistaken. I'm just not aware of things like that.
Well, and part of the problem is that, you know, they essentially use the same tactics that you would use, you know, the same tactics that would be used for a legitimate operation are used for an illegitimate operation. So I don't want to like impugn the notion that you know, direct mail is a perfectly legitimate way to raise money, assuming it's done appropriately, and I've written about that. So just because you're doing direct mail, or just because you're an outside group, or just because you're doing email solicitations, that in and of itself is philosophically and ethically neutral. You could be doing that for a very worthwhile cause. So the problem is that, you know, consultants have figured out, some of these consultants have figured out that you could, you know, say, you know, in the old days it was always Ted Kennedy. You know, Hillary Clinton wants to cause your children to, you know, worship Barack Obama and have Common Core in the classroom, and you don't even need a candidate. You can start your own group, and you can raise money, you know, using other people's name, other people's likeness. That's actually part of Cuccinelli's lawsuit, by the way, is alleging that they violated Virginia law and using his name and likeness without his permission. That'll be interesting to see if that's upheld as a public figure. But you could do that, and who says what's a good amount to give? Like, everybody knows there's overhead. I mean, even if you're the most ethical, competent, efficient organization in the world, you're going to have some overhead, right? You're going to potentially have offices. You might have a staff. Stamps cost money. Web servers cost money. Maybe it's 50%. Maybe it's 90% overhead. I mean, who's to say? There's no law saying that you have to give X percent away or spend it on independent expenditures or give it directly to candidates and causes. So this is ripe for exploitation. And you know, I'm not saying that most groups, certainly not all groups that do this stuff are bad, but there are some bad apples out there. And I do give Cuccinelli props for, you know, I think they maybe messed with the wrong cowboy on this one. This is a guy who was the attorney general, and he's an attorney, and he's an activist, and he's very principled, like him or lump him. And so I think they messed with the wrong guy, and he's, you know, don't take the law into your own hands. You take him to court, as Greg Llewellyn famously advised us, and that's what he's doing.
Now, does this help Cuccinelli maintain some viability in state politics? Does he have more life left in him, and does this make him look like an objective crusader, you know, taking on one of his own in the cause of clean government, or does this step on toes in the conservative movement, and it makes it harder for him to move forward?
Well, look, I think Cuccinelli is a reformer at heart, and I think he is a very principled person, and that hurt him politically in many ways because he's not a great politician, but he's a very principled politician, and those two things are sometimes at odds with each other. I don't think this is a very good political move necessarily. It probably gets him more enemies than friends. I just think he's doing it because he's got scores to settle. And frankly, I think that it's a good thing to send a message to these outside groups and these vendors who work for them. Cuccinelli, I think, is done in Virginia. But he is now the president of the Senate Conservatives Fund, a group that was founded by Jim DeMint, and a guy named Matt Hoskins ran it for a while, and he's still involved. But Cuccinelli, I think he's now in the sort of national conservative activist scene, which I think really makes this a gutsy move. This is a guy who is for the Senate Conservatives Fund, a group that spends money. You know, Ken Cuccinelli runs the Senate Conservatives Fund, a group which spends money doing, you know, independent expenditures and you know, whatever, and helping candidates when they can't coordinate, but helping candidates that they endorse and they use techniques like direct mail fundraising and email solicitation, and he's going after these allegedly bad guys. And I think that's very interesting, and you know, we'll see how it plays out, but it strikes me as quite noble.
Now, another item that came across my transom is probably CNN's Crossfire is on an extended hiatus. And I believe your publication, your august publication, Daily Caller, had the scoop that they're laying off staff, Crossfire staff. And as two people who do a little bit of a hybrid ideological video presentation once a week, it's a little sad when we see other folks doing the same thing and more prominent platforms not be able to pull it off. I'm a cord cutter, so I don't see Crossfire. I always was a little suspicious of the chemistry of who they chose. I mean, I kind of liked having Van Jones and S.E. Cupp. They seem to be kind of, you know, fresh-faced, younger, non-elected types. Then you have on a former Obama spokesperson. You have on Newt Gingrich. Now you're in the annals of, you know, not sort of, you know, media types who are detached from the political system. You have people sort of the system. That's always a different kind of dynamic. And, you know, and I believe, you know, Chuck Todd has said that he's not going to have these panels anymore, Meet the Press, where you have the politicians and the pundits on at the same time, because it leads to very stilted conversation, which I agree with. It just, you need a firewall there if you're going to have, if you're going to draw out interesting insights and not just have revert to talking points.
Yeah, I don't like the thing where you mix on a panel where you mix journalists with activists and politicians. I don't like that. I find, as a rule, now Newt Gingrich, as a politician, a former politician, is frankly stunningly interesting. So Newt sort of does defy the rule, but as a rule, I find journalists and commentators much more interesting than activists and politicians, and so I don't like that. I was rooting for Crossfire to come back. I don't think it worked. In hindsight, first of all, they should not have done it. I think it was on at 6:30 when it was on. They were preempting it a lot, but during, you know, the missing Malaysian jet, 6:30 is the worst time to put it on because you're up against the Fox News special report panel. Why not put it on at 6 even, up against the Bret Baier News? But going up against, you're essentially pitting your panel against Fox News panel, and special reports were really super good. So I think that was a scheduling mistake. I have no idea why they did that, but I didn't like that. I think S.E. Cupp is a rising star. You cannot doubt that. I think Newt is brilliant, although who knows if that's the right milieu for him. The two on the left, I did not think, in my opinion, had the charisma. So that was just me, but clearly it did not. It was a failed experiment.
Now, what I don't understand is why, if you're going to bring it back, why not bring it back from its original incarnation, which were, you know, two co-hosts, one left, one right, and have them be pretty pugnacious, but journalists, columnists, and then you have one guest in the middle, and the two hosts beat the crap out of that person from each side. Yeah, that's what the Crossfire concept was about.
That's what we call a devil's threesome, and
I don't want to get into your personal life, Matt.
It worked until they messed it up by pitting my boss Tucker Carlson, who was a pugnacious journalist, with political operatives like James Carville and Paul Begala. And I think that's not a fair fight. It doesn't work. And I think that was sort of the beginning of the end. But no, when you have, you know, the Bob Novaks and the Pat Buchanans and the Bill Presses even, I think that's, to me, more interesting.
I mean, so I feel what I'm worried about is people are going to say, well, you can't have a left-right show. It will never work. And I don't think that's accurate. I think people would like to have, there is a way to have entertaining and informative debates in this world. It's not an impossible thing to do. But you need to have sort of two people who can go toe to toe, but not just recite the same talking points that you're hearing everywhere else. To actually have a conversation and a dialogue that moves the ball forward in some way. And if you're going to have a guest on, that they're peppering that guest with questions coming from both sides that you may not hear in a more traditional interview setup, because they're going to be more ideologically pointed questions.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right, Bill. I hope you're right. I mean, to me, the perfect show is like a dinner party with really smart people. With Christopher Hitchens as a guest, kind of thing. I wish I still believed that would work, but the more I'm in this business, and I pitch a book idea, and it ends up becoming, by the end of it, something that would appeal to the masses, and it just gets changed, and that's how it works in these TV pitch ideas, where you have an idea that would be an interesting show, and then by the end of it, it's what everyone else is doing. Now, I am interested to see this new Bloomberg show with Halperin and Heilemann. That looks different, and who knows if they'll pull it off, but there you have two guys who are ostensibly neutral journalists, who are buddies, who will be doing a political show. And I don't know if you saw the trailer or the promos for it, but it was sort of a combination of Seinfeld and Pardon the Interruption, and it was just and maybe like Anthony Bourdain's CNN show. It looked visually very different. I don't know if that was just the promo or if that's going to be how the show is, if it's going to be in a studio.
Well, I saw the promo. It made it seem like it'd be kind of vivacious and hilarious, very offbeat. And
yeah, can they pull it off?
I think John Heilemann is a fantastic reporter. Mark Halperin, I think has his good points and bad points. But neither one strikes me as being, hilarious on-air personalities. I mean, that's just not. I mean, they're good in a panel discussion. They often bring certain scoops to the table.
But give them credit, though. Give them credit for trying something different. I mean, again, we don't know if the execution will be as good as the promo, but the promo was different, and that's what I think we need to take shots. We've done this. We've done this to death, these cable shows, and
I worry for them that their promo is not going to match who they're going to be on their show.
Right, because look, if they were to do that day in and day out, or week in and week out, whenever the show's going to air, that would be incredibly time-consuming, time-intensive. It would be costly. It would take writers and writing, and it would take getting permission to film at a ballpark or whatever. It's so much easier just to sort of do it on the fly like we do it, in the comfort of your office kind of thing.
Should we leave it on that note, or is there something else that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. We could just keep talking. We could always talk, but brevity is the soul of wit. So let's we can end it there. Is that right? Did I quote that right? Brevity. Anyway, shorter is better. How about that?
Always good to talk to you. I think it's going to be a rollicking midterm season that awaits us. And we'll get back to it next week.
Yeah. We have to look. We do this show whether there's fun stuff to talk about or not, whether we know anything about it or not. Frankly, we just do it day in and day out. Like Cal Ripken, you show up at the ballpark whether you feel like it or not. But I feel like now we are starting to enter into our zone, where we can kick butt. And I think today's show, an award. Potentially an award winner. Nominate us. I think we should be, potentially nominated for some sort of a daytime Emmy or something for this, something like that. So anyway, you can check us out on Twitter at the DMZ. No, I take that back. Check us out on Twitter at DMZ Show. Same thing on Facebook /DMZ Show. You can also get this on podcast on iTunes. So just listen to us. If you don't like to watch us, listen to us on the treadmill. I got a podcast too, the Matt Lewis in the News. Check that out. Read us at the week, and keep supporting blogging heads.
you're so good at the promotion. I can't do that. I just don't have the skill. I just forget to do it.
Yeah, every once in a while, people say, "Thank you for telling me. I didn't know you could just listen to the show." And or people will tweet us. Now following us on Facebook, we will if you follow the Twitter feed. Once the show goes up, you'll get a tweet saying it's up, and then you can come listen or watch. So you don't have to keep checking in. Although, please do click the ads at Blogging Heads and at the Daily Caller and at Liberal Oasis. Feel free to do that. And maybe refresh the page a few times, but you can just follow.
One last bit of news before we go. I just see on my Twitter stream a new poll has Shaheen up 10 over Scott Brown.
Oh, that's clearly an outlier, Bill.
I mean, these all seem like outliers. I think all this should be discounted. Comes down to turnout.
You got it right, Bill Scher. As always, stay classy, San Diego, and we'll see you back here next week.
Take care.